you understand about incoming GCs that made you so effective in that role?
Yeah, it's a really pivotal moment for companies. We and I particularly function as outside GC for so many of my clients. And so when they grow to the stage where they are able to hire their own GC, it's a really pivotal moment for them. It indicates that, they probably fundraise to a certain point, their operations up to a certain point where they actually, it necessitates having their own GC. So it's exciting for us because it's like watching our little, baby clients grow. And it's also really exciting because it changes our relationship with the company in a really interesting way. So we go from, working one-on-one or, directly with the founders to working with a lawyer who, we sort of speak the same language. We can, communicate in a very different way than I would, speak with founders. And I like that variety. I like that some of the relationships I have are directly with founders and some of them are with lawyers in-house. And so that is, it's something I really enjoy, having that variety. And when we get to switch to having that GC role, I see my role as really making you look good as GC, right? Because your client as GC is the founders and everyone else internally. So my job really is to do everything possible to make you look good, to give everything you need. And especially in that moment when you're transitioning into that role, to give you all the institutional knowledge that I've built up as the kind of functional outsourced GC in all of the months or years.
The feeling that we have, and I think you understand really well, and you just outlined, right, is there's emotional intelligence that you understand about the fear, the anxiety of that GC that's rolling in and trying to get their arms around the company. And you hit it perfectly. What makes you better outside than inside? Have you ever considered giving it a shot?
Yeah, it's a good question. I certainly have over time. It's something that I thought about. I was kind of, as I was coming up the ranks at Cooley and thinking about, what I wanted to do long term. I like the variety of working with lots of different companies. And so I sort of like that ability to kind of lift others up in their role. And so I like being able to do that with multiple people at a time. And I realized that I wouldn't, if I sort of stepped into a single role, I wouldn't be able to kind of be able to do that with lots of different people in their GC roles.
I feel like you said it perfectly, right? You make the GCs look good. And there's a sort of, not just that you've been in the seat before, whether it's outside GC, but I think just a unique perspective that you bring to the role that you're in today. So both of us had careers before law. You had an interesting one as well. What do you think helps you be most effective in your career paths?
Yeah, so on the personal front, before, career life, I was a competitive athlete. I was a college gymnast and diver, and there's a certain level of, grit and determination and hard work that comes with it, right? And obviously being a lawyer in whatever capacity you're doing that in, and, being a founder, functioning in this ecosystem generally requires a lot of grit and determination and hard work. So those are things that I really, cultivated growing up and through college. And then in my early career, I was a strategy consultant and had primarily focused on scenario planning, which is the idea of kind of using political and economic and social factors along with data about companies to sort of help them figure out, long-term and short-term plans for going forward. That really shaped my interest in working with companies from that outside advisory role. And it also, and I didn't truly appreciate it at the time, but looking back, I realized that scenario planning was such a great preparation for law, because as you know, law is so much about thinking about what could possibly go wrong. What are all of possible scenarios that could play out? And how do you best prepare, a company, a founder for all the things that could happen, knowing that you can never do everything perfectly and you can't possibly set them up for every scenario, but just having this long-term perspective on different ways in which things could play out. I found that actually to be directly applicable to how I think about my practice today and how I work with companies.
I really like that. There's this sense of your, even just your athlete background, where there's a discipline of focus. And so much of the legal career is responding. I feel like there's the discipline that's needed to just hone in. Otherwise, you'll be speaking forever on all the infinite level of risk involved in doing some sort of business transaction or moving into a certain market. There's there's a sense of limitation that you have to hit, right? So you have to be prioritizing what you put in front of your clients. How do you start thinking about taking that background that you have and advising the future Tara, right? Who is coming up the ranks and really kind of thinking about how do I set myself up towards success in the future? Is there a recipe? Is there a path that they could take, especially in this market, that will help them succeed in the future?
Yeah, what really helped me was focusing on getting some broad experience my first few years practicing. Even though I knew that I wanted to do business law and I wanted to work with companies, that obviously covers a lot of breadth. And so I spent some time my first couple of years figuring out what it was that really energized me. And working with founders and working with investors really was what did that and made me want to, really learn more about it and really become an expert in the craft. And so spending those kind of, especially really couple of years, really figuring out what I love doing in business law, and then getting lots of reps, right? Because there's so many things that you need to do as you get later in your career, but just getting that repetition. And so you're seeing not 10, not 20, but 100 deals of different types a year. There's just no replacement for that. So getting those reps. And then I guess the additional thing I'd layer on there is investing in relationships, right? So kind of true across the board universally, but looking back, the colleagues that I had internally, even as a first year, are people that I still work with in the ecosystem today. So, relationships internally and externally with clients, both lawyers and, CFOs and even kind of, back office folks at investment teams. I've sort of interacted with people over the years that they've moved in and out of different roles. And that has both made my work really rewarding and also really helped with the, cohesion of new client relationships and helped all pieces kind of fit together.
But I could tell you as a founder, as a general counsel, as someone who's scaling their business, anytime I could bring in Tara to work on something high, I will do it. It's really hard if you're graduating today and you see the apprenticeship model is really being strange. Hey, how do you start thinking about those reps that you've talked about? Someone is going to graduate or is already moving in to a firm such as yours. Are they going to get the reps they need to succeed?
So when I see associates come in as summer associates or first years, there had been a shift in the work from when I, came in more than a decade ago. You give a lot of the kind of rote tasks we did back, more than a decade ago are no longer needed because even pre-AI, we've automated them, we created forms. And so I think there are challenges in how young associates are learning because you don't have to think very much, just generate the work, right? And so I think the apprenticeship model still works. It's still alive and well. We just have to be more thoughtful about it. So it's certainly something I think about all the time when I work with associates, and it's something that we talk about all the time in trainings, which is like, even when you just see an example, can generate a form offer letter. The first few times you're doing it, don't just generate and spit it out as just client, read it through, make sure you understand it, read all the footnotes. Like there is a level of understanding. Just because you can automate it doesn't mean that should be your only action to move it forward. Because as you become more senior, you're going to be the person getting the questions of, what are the terms I can change? Or can we do severance? Or how do we structure a bonus? And if you don't know how the basic terms work, you have no basis to answer those kinds of questions. And so the apprenticeship model certainly has, we have to shift kind of how we best deploy people in terms of the work. And we certainly have to be more mindful in terms of training. But I think it is still very doable. And it's something that we're working on all the time.
How do you know you have an excellent associate? Like, I feel like some of the best times where I've seen an associate make that pivot is when the question that they're asking makes me think about why 10, 20 years of experience and say, that's a really great question.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to identify it. And I think it's asking really good questions. It's demonstrating a level of engagement, and asking good questions is one of the ways of doing that. Having great attention to detail. There's kind of like a very basic skill set of things both that associates do and skills that they demonstrate that you can really see an archetype of people that want to be really good and enjoy the job and are willing to put in the hard, detailed work and get in the reps to kind of lay that foundation for, being able to be a trusted advisor later once they kind of accumulated that knowledge and experience.
I mean, shifting to San Francisco, I think this is, one of the areas where obviously you spend a lot more time is startups, building in the Valley. What makes you such an exceptional advisor to those startups?
Well, thank you, first of all. The number one thing is that I come at everything from a business angle, right? So my background is in consulting. I obviously have a law degree and have to have the legal acumen. But especially when you're working with startups, everything has to be business oriented and practical, right? So I cannot come in and just read you a statute. That's not actionable, right? That doesn't give you anything. So there has to be I bring in a very practical orientation, a business understanding, and then deep experience that comes from getting those years and years of reps, coupled with a real understanding of the relationship that we're working with. And that means the relationship between you and I, for example, understanding how maybe your level of risk tolerance, understanding who your client is internally, understanding what your motivation is, what your timeline is, our relationship, and then understanding the broader context around us, right? So if we're on a deal, understanding that, maybe we are trying to win every single point because it's an M&A deal. And so it's a one-time thing and we're really just going hard on the negotiation. Maybe it's a financing and you want this investor to reinvest in the next deal. And you don't want to completely, burn everything to the ground and win every point. You want to make sure you build foundation that to invest again. So I really try to come at things from a very practical, business-oriented angle, built on years of experience and that knowledge, and then an understanding of the relationships and the context. And those things together allow me to get practical if so just telling you kind of all of the options on the table are not that helpful. But if I can combine all those things together and say, based on my experience, based on what I'm seeing, based on what I understand about your risk tolerance and what you need to achieve here, I suggest this.
I love this because the through line in a lot of your comments have been this empathy that you have for the other side of the table. And that was, when I walked into my role, I think there's a lot of velocity around founders and hunters doing deals, especially in the recent next. There's some movement in the industry to really get as much focus on these deals as possible. And I would love it. So I've done but the founder bit, the funder bit. If I had Tara in my corner, I'd be very, very happy, very fortunate. What do you see that people are spending time on those deals where it might not be as important? And what are they blazing past where they cause slowdown?
So in terms of what's not important that people get hung up on, I think it's honestly a lot of lawyers get really bogged down in the details. And I think it's just not thinking practically, not thinking about the business. So you'll see a lot of lawyers will kind of take their diligence list and take their request for documents and kind of run through it and ask all the questions and spend a lot of time on details that don't really matter because, for example, if they're representing an investor, they're not really focused on what value is the investor trying to get out of the company. What are the risks? What are actually the key things to focus on? And so I think particularly around diligence, it's not always the lack of diligence, it's a lack of focus on the right things. And so I certainly see some of that. In 2020 and 2021, I think we're moving even faster than they are now, or at least in terms of number of deals. There was definitely a reduction in the total amount of diligence, which was a different trend. But certainly I'm seeing some of that kind of lack of focus on the right things in diligence. In terms of what investors and companies may not be focusing on enough, one trend that we've been seeing a lot of is hostile hires, right? And so it's not as if we need to focus on it more. It's just something we will be aware of, right? Because they're not necessarily a great way to mitigate if that's the outcome for the company. But if an investor invests and ultimately the outcome is the founders get jobs at, large tech company A, so the investors are kind of left with nothing. So something that both companies and investors are maybe not focusing on enough is safes. And so safes have become, as we all know, very common, right? They're, the easiest tools to invest in. However, they're not always, companies are always kind of model out what the dilution looks like. And so that's something that I always make sure I'm doing with founders especially when they're layering on multiple rounds of stays, because the dilution can be very surprising, especially when they raise, they're raising on a valuation cap and then they raise a priced round and all of a sudden essentially giving away millions of dollars in the company for nothing. And so that's not, there's always a solve for it, because sometimes you have to get the first money in to mitigate the risk to get the next money in. But I think it's really important that companies go in with eyes wide open and understanding, it can feel a little bit like free money that you kind of deal with on conversion, and being really mindful of that, exactly how much you're kicking in and looking at how it models out. On the investor side, similarly, SAFEs are, again, great tool, not against them. I love SAFEs. But for investors they have no rights in the company. They have no, preferred stock protect provision. They have no votes in the company. They're on the board. They're essentially a silent partner in the company. And if that's what they understand they sign up to, that would be fine. But I find that some investors don't entirely, understand the ramifications of that until things play out in a way that they wish they could have some degree of control. And there are some solves for that. Like there's, can work around that contractually. And sometimes it makes sense, especially when they're, putting in not $100,000, but $7 million. It makes sense to, pause and really be a little more thoughtful.
There's an important part of capturing, like you said, you got a mental model for the economic value of a deal, the risks of a deal, and the fragility of that pace is only going to come to the surface maybe 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line. Are we seeing that yet in the market? Are we starting to see the ramifications?
It's an interesting question. I'm not personally seeing it yet. I think that we will, and I think some of it will be on, the valuations front. Some company will end up doing down rounds or flat rounds. And some of that may be on the regulatory front. So I think another thing that is often sort of underanalyzed, in part because you sort of can't analyze everything, but also in part because investors or their pals don't always have the right level of expertise to be analyzing the regulatory issues. Those regulations can come to play out in, a year, 2 years, 5 years, whether it's like export sanction that either are a problem now or become a problem later because the regulations evolve, which they are. So that's certainly something that could continue to evolve over time and really impact some of the investments that have been made in companies over the last couple of years.
So we've spent some time talking about law practice. We've also seen radical changes, whether it's inside legal departments, whether it's inside law firms, and that shift is only going to continue. Where you want it to go, if you were at the helm of a legal department, you're at the helm of a law firm, and you're obviously in the trenches doing the work as well, so you're seeing the outputs, where you want to see that technology, that change in operate, all make a difference in the work you do?
The big question, right? I think at a very high level, we all want to be doing work that's meaningful, right? And so if we can be using AI in a legal work that we're doing to make the time that we spend more meaningful and more focused on being in an advisory role, then we're doing it right. And if we are at a law firm pricing the work that we're doing focused on the actual real valuable time, that's what makes sense for clients. And so maybe that be moving away from a billable model, and maybe it means pricing on projects. Maybe it means like billable for certain type things. There are a lot of shifts that could happen at firms as a result of how we're using AI. Fundamentally, what is great for everybody, what will be great for everyone, is if we're all using technology to make the work that we're doing more meaningful for us, as lawyers, and to kind of lift up our clients and make the service that they're receiving more efficient, more valuable.
3 years from now, how do we know we've failed? What is that failure point?
So I think a sign of failure would be if we haven't changed enough. I don't think that is going to happen. Another sign of failure would be that we are not using AI in a smart way. And that means maybe we're not interacting, maybe we're not, prompting agents correctly, maybe we're not using the right tools at the right time. We haven't just figured out how to engage the tools in the right, meaningful way in our work. I think that's probably the more likely version of failure. And I hope that it's not, a full version of failure, but my hunch is that we're going to have to continue leaning into that over time and figuring out like how best to use these tools and adjusting our work. And it's going to be, continue to shift over time. But I think that that's the likelier failure is not us doing nothing. It's doing the wrong things or not being thoughtful enough about how we're engaging with AI.
We started this conversation about relationships, empathy. And I feel like my own version of this is if I get in between Tara and her client using some version of either a work model change, technology change, value change, we failed because Tara's at her very best when she's spending time with clients, deeply understanding work, bringing her market perspective. How do we avoid that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, one of the greatest things about AI is hyper-personalization. So if we can use AI to make my role more personalized rather than less personalized, that's great, right? If I can have more information about what you need and about, the specific legal changes in whatever regulatory area you're running into, and if I had that at the ready and I have the right tools to get that to you, that is a great use of AI, right? So it doesn't mean reducing our personal interaction. It means making more personalized the service and enables to deliver to you.
Let's focus in on practical today. What can someone do if they're building a legal? What are 2 things that they could build today that will actually change your work?
So there's obviously a lot of great legal tech tools. We use some of them here. We're building some of our own. So, we've experimented with a lot of them. I think there's actually 2 small things that are not sort of purely legal that I think about regularly that I would love to just have kind of a better AI tool for. And one is calendaring, and this may exist already, so someone can let me know if it does exist. But I would love, for example, like a better AI tool for calendaring. Like, for example, I would love to, rather than starting from scratch on being, saying, okay, let's meet for coffee at 3 p.m. on this time, I would love like a suggestion of saying like, okay, you do your deep work on Mondays and this day and that time, and you typically meet this client in this area of the Bay Area, like suggest a cafe and suggest a day and time. And like that has not yet made its way into how my calendar functions. And I consider that as just like another way to personalize the service that I deliver and how I work with people, right? If I could just say like, hey, Rana, there's this great place right near you. Let's like meet here because I know you told me you have a meeting. And so if I could have a better way to kind of calendar, that would be just another level of how I could coordinate.
Will you get more Terrapines? Well, I would love that. Yeah.
Better directed anyway, at kind of the right times and places. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think a lot about is tools for learning. And I know obviously there's lots of AI tools for learning. I would love to have tools that sort of integrate with our document management system, right? So law firms have, millions of documents in our document management system. I would love to be able to, if I'm, training an associate, be able to say, here's an M&A agreement. Here's the provision I'm talking about. Here is, I like type in a prompt for like, here's the variation I want in that provision. It pulls 10 examples anonymized and a summary from LexisNexis explaining what that provision is, and then a statute from somewhere else explaining, what the ramifications are. And like being able to pull the pieces together for learning purposes. I don't yet have a tool that does that. And I would love to be able to do that in like a really efficient and customized way for people. Internally and externally too, right? Like if I could, you were trying to understand latest changes in Delaware law, around stockholder litigation, and I could say, hey, we've got, this client alert we put out, and we have this memo that someone drafted, and I could like pull the pieces together for resources that we have internally and from kind of external paid sources that we have access to. That really feels like a magical moment where I can really upgrade the level of, learning that I can deliver.
Yeah. It's really interesting what you're talking about in terms of innovation, right? So most innovation that we've seen has been very process oriented, right? It's the process of doing the work, the process of drafting, the process of getting something out. You talked about calendaring and learning, right? Both of which are very high human touch, relationship focused work. You're building a deeper relationship with the associate or someone that's coming on board, but ultimately you want them to produce more value and get to value faster, right? And the same thing with the calendar. So it's really easy. I love this future that we're talking about where there's a high level of abundance. You got all this extra time. What are you going to do with it? Where do you want to spend more time, either inside the walls or outside the walls?
Yeah, so it's great to have these tools, both the ones that I imagine and hope they exist, and the ones that we, already have. We have great tools for, finding provision to documents and free searching and summarizing. Like, there's all these wonderful tools that we already have access to. So taking into account what we already have and what we will probably have in the future and things we probably can't yet imagine, that free kind of extra time would allow me to work with more founders, work with more investors, do more deals, and spend more meaningful time on the business side. So one of the things that I enjoy most is being able to attend board meetings. It's an incredibly, it's an incredible privilege to be able to sit in the room with some of the smartest people in the world, I think, making some of the most important decisions, and watch how they think and understand and process. That's something that I really enjoy, and I get a lot of value out of, because I think it shapes how I, make decisions in my life and my work. And that's something I do as much as I possibly can, but sometimes don't have time to go to every single one. That's something I would love to go to every single board meeting that I possibly could. And it also makes me a better lawyer for those companies, because we can see around the corners and we can, understand the context in which we're operating. So having, better legal tools, better legal tech allows me to spend even more time on the business side, which then translates into better legal service too.
I think the last 18 to 24 months, you must have seen so much inside those board meetings, inside the walls, right? Even of the firm. Is there someone who you have looked at as, kind of a hero in how they navigated the past 18 to 24 months? This could be someone you're working with, obviously someone that's out in market, but the industry is shifting so fast and the pressure on these people is tremendous. Who do you admire? Who navigated it well?
Yeah. So first of all of the founders, young founders that are working in AI right now that are, pushfully coming out of universities. I work with a lot of founders out of Berkeley. There is just an incredible level of intelligence and determination and hard work and innovation that's coming out of Berkeley and AI companies. And I just have so much admiration for that. And it's a real privilege to work with so many of those companies. So just as a whole, it's a real privilege to work with so many of those business leaders and professors. Specifically, I'm really inspired by some of the business leaders that are using AI for good in the world, right? So obviously there's a lot that's shifted in the world over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, and there's so much room to use AI to really amplify philanthropy. So, for example, I think of, Arianna Huffington. First of all, running a media business is really hard. So, lots of respect for anyone who's trying to run a media business right now. And watching her kind of reinnovate that has been really interesting, exciting, not just over the past, 18 to 24 months. But she's also, she gave a speech at USC, I think last year, just about, how we should be using AI to improve our, mental and physical and spiritual health, and to help us improve our sense of self and not just our sense of the world around us, because it is shifting how we perceive everything around us. Another person is Bill Gates. He just announced a big initiative with OpenAI using AI health tools in Africa, and he's also created a whole bunch of the Gates Foundation has first of all made a bunch of investments in AI for good, around education and agriculture. And there's just so much power that AI can bring to philanthropy. And so seeing leaders like that that are really using technology in a way that fills such an important gap, especially when I think about, international aid and things that have really shifted. That to me is really inspirational and makes me excited about the pace and the shift of AI, because there is so much good that can be created too.
Where do you think we're headed this year and in years forward?
So just based on the sort of fundraising that we're seeing in, information that's publicly available, VCs that are raising funds, AI focused specifically, I think there's just going to be a lot more funds continuing to slosh around in AI. Lots of great AI companies getting funded. I think we're going to see some consolidation in certain industries. We're certainly seeing it in legal tech. I think we'll see it in some other industries that I'm seeing a little more of, where there's a bit of kind of first mover advantage with AI companies. So I think we'll see some consolidation in certain areas of AI. We've seen some opening of the capital markets. My, hope and expectation is that, this year and hopefully certainly later this year, there'll be, continued opening up the capital markets. What's unknown is that we are at a fundamental shift in technology. This is not like the shift in, downturns in the market. This is not like, it's even more fundamental than the, internet era, right? Like this is a shift that happens, every 100 years or more, right? Like this is, it's hard to imagine all of the changes that are going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years because we haven't seen a fundamental shift like this maybe ever, right? I don't know, think about the Industrial Revolution, right? Like we're on kind of par with that level of shift and change in society. And so it is, I don't think that we have a model for the sort of degree and type of change that has happened in a previous era to apply to what we're going to see going forward over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
We're all on a roller coaster. I guess we're on it together.
Absolutely.
Thank you for doing this. This is so much fun.